Podcast Amsterdam.
Extinction Rebellion in Amsterdam. The co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, Roger Hallam, visited Amsterdam in August to give a talk and inspire us to join in their global movement in response to the climate crisis. Broadcast Amsterdam asked Roger to tell us what it's all about.
Well, I'm actually here to tell people the truth, because the big thing about Extinction Rebellion is telling people the truth about the climate catastrophe. And that's a horrifying truth, and it's very upsetting, and it's leading a lot of people to fundamentally reassess their priorities in terms of political engagement and what have you. And I'm here to tell people about what's happening in a blunt way. Our children are going to starve to death if we don't sort this problem out, and even if we try and sort it out, it's not guaranteed we're not going to go into this pit of hell that's coming down towards us. And I think all around the world people have started waking up to this reality, and Extinction Rebellion has helped people to move from despair to civil disobedience, which is what's now required.
In Amsterdam, in March 2019, we already got 40,000 people marching to draw attention to climate crisis. So how is the Extinction Rebellion movement different from that kind of action?
Well, to be blunt, nothing dramatic is going to happen until people break the law. Breaking the law is the fundamental element in civil disobedience, which is to calmly and peacefully break the law. And it's a proven method, basically, of bringing about rapid change when states and governments engage in horrendously immoral activity, as they are now, by facilitating the climate catastrophe and not taking emergency action. So that's what's made Extinction Rebellion original, as it were, because the clue's in the title, it's a rebellion. And that's not like a sort of branding word. That's what we're about. We're about rebelling against governments in a peaceful, non-violent way, but nevertheless rebelling against them.
So the Extinction Rebellion model has 5 or so key elements, one of which is to focus action on your nation's capital city, where the economic and political power is concentrated. However, in the Netherlands, Amsterdam may be the capital city, but our government sits in Den Haag. And wouldn't disrupting Dutch ports or the agricultural industry make more sense, rather than just stopping tourists getting to the Van Gogh Museum, for example? With Extinction Rebellion being a decentralised, autonomous organisation, if, for example, action in the Netherlands needed a different approach, would you be okay with that?
Okay, well, a model's only a model, right? And it's there to be, adapted to circumstances. And there's been the same debate in the States, where Washington, D.C. is, it's just one small city in this big country. And wouldn't it make sense to go and blockade sort of the major cities around America, and particularly New York, for instance, which is, possibly the most significant city in the States. So, these things need working out. But I think what's made Extinction Rebellion significant is it's based upon social scientific research on the most effective way to fundamentally change societies in a short amount of time in a progressive direction. And that model is primarily about influencing the state and the government rather than particular bad things that are happening. And over the last 30 years, the climate change movement, quite rightly in many ways, has been focusing on, coal mines and what have you. But when you're in emergency, you have to sort of go straight to the institution that makes the fundamental rules of society, and that institution is the state and the government. And if you want to get rapid results, then you have to close down the government or close down the capital city in a peaceful way, of course. But nevertheless, it's a dramatic situation, but it's a crisis, and this is what Extinction Rebellion is about.
So in Amsterdam, we're pretty socially liberal. We've just elected a Green-led local government. And when October comes and there's disruption to local residents and workers who may feel they're already making a difference, what would you say to them?
Well, what people understand is that we're in an objective, scientific, existential emergency. It means in the next 5 to 10 years we'll start to see social collapse around the world due to food crises and extreme social conditions that come from that. So we're entering into a period of history that we haven't experienced, arguably for thousands of years, and certainly since World War II. So a big problem is that people haven't really emotionally grasped the extremity of that sort of hell. People have you live in your own experience, and the fact of it is European people have had by historical standards, had a fantastic time for the last 30, 40 years. But that's coming to an end, because what we've done is we've melted the ice in the Arctic, and that's going to destroy the weather systems, and that's going to mean we're not going to have enough food, and that means people are going to starve. So, it's a bit like going to a doctor and you've had a nice healthy life and he suddenly tells you you've got terminal cancer. You can sort of deny that as long as you like, but it's just it's a raw scientific fact. He shows you the x-rays, and the more you deny it, the more likely you're going to die, because you haven't done you haven't done the chemotherapy and what have you. So our societies have got a really fundamental choice, which is, do you want to live in reality, or do you want to delude yourself that you can carry on the way we have been? And all the reformist politicians and the governments are pursuing the idea that we don't have to do drastic action. And it's not like a big political or left-wing thing, it's just the science at the end of the day. We have to decommission the fossil fuel industry in the next year or two. That's what we need to do. And obviously, if it takes 5 years, it takes 5 years, and we could do it in 3 months. There's variations on the theme. But it's in that ballpark. We're talking about extreme social transformation in a very short period of time. And that's why most of the people that, study this sort of thing point to World War II, when, Britain and America transformed their economies in a matter of months. So, no, it doesn't really matter if you've got green councillors, okay?
So in your opinion, the Dutch government's latest target of reducing carbon emissions by half by 2030 is not enough?
Well, it's not an opinion thing. When you go to the doctor and tells you you've got cancer and he shows you the chart, it's not an opinion, it's a fact. The fact of the matter is we're going to have social collapse in the next 10 years, right? It might be in the next 2 or 3 years, it might be in 15 years, but it's coming down the line because we're not going to have enough food to eat. There's a whole host of other terrible things that are going to happen, which I haven't got time to go through. So, it's like this is the big social realisation that's happening at the moment. And the governments obviously aren't getting with the programme because they're stuck in the old paradigm. And that's why you need mass civil disobedience. I can talk to you about this for as long as you like, right? But most of your audience aren't going to get it because people don't get information. How people change and how societies change is through mass disruption and the emotions that creates. And, it's not a nice thing to do, of course, but, compared with human extinction, it's probably worth it.
The Extinction Rebellion movement was formed following what you call 30 years of failed campaigning. So now, after 1 year of operation and the 2 big protests of October 2018 and April 2019, what has Extinction Rebellion itself achieved other than mobilising lots of people? Has there been any direct results, changes of directions by governments or what you call elites?
Well, the biggest civil disobedience that's happened in the UK, where it started, and there were 1,200 arrests in 8 days earlier in April, which people may know about, which was the biggest episode of civil disobedience in British history. And that transformed the debate in the UK. Before April, not many people in Britain at all knew about the climate emergency, and afterwards 67% of the British population now agree there is a climate emergency, and it was debated in Parliament, and the British Parliament is the first parliament in the world to vote through the fact that there is a climate and environmental sort of emergency happening. Having said that, of course, nothing else has happened because the political elites won't do anything until there's many more arrests and there's people in prison and all the rest of it. So this October, on the 7th of October, thousands of people will be blockading London again, and they'll also be doing it all around Europe. And we're going to be in for a big shock because people are really angry, they're full of rage. People don't want to see their children die. It's the most basic human emotion, isn't it? And the fact of the matter is, if we allow governments to continue to let the fossil fuel industry poison our future, then, we're Europeans, aren't we? We have a tradition of rebelling against, designs to kill us all,
In the Netherlands, we live under sea level. We're pretty much aware of the threat to our existence. Aren't we preaching to the converted by any activism here? Shouldn't we be focused on big polluting countries like China?
Well, everyone has to start in their own backyard, don't they? That's a basic moral principle. So there's an awful lot that Europeans can and should be doing to transform their economy, as I've just discussed, and that's the first step. I think it's beyond immoral to imply that other countries that haven't been responsible for this crisis, should be reducing their carbon emissions before us. And it's a fundamental moral contradiction, isn't it? The Europeans and the rich of the world have basically created this disaster. So, it stands to reason that they should be making major sacrifices now. And if we don't, we're all going to be dead. So, people should stop squabbling, right? It's a bit like having a boat and you're heading towards the Niagara Falls, right? The more you squabble, the less likely you're going to get to the shore. So everyone's got to start working together and work it out and take some responsibility.
You compare Extinction Rebellion activism to a labour strike, but the civil disobedience planned for October 2019 is only set to last a week. So what if that's not long enough? Will Extinction Rebellion be bolder in the future if those events don't achieve very much?
Well, you're right. It's basically, civil disobedience is a bit like a labour strike. It's the same idea. Is you increase the economic costs to the opponent, and at some point the opponent obviously decides to negotiate because they're losing too much money, to be blunt. And it's the same thing that we've got to do, to the government and to the global elites. They have to start losing money due to our civil disobedience. So you're right, it's a numbers game and it's a time game. So the longer it goes on with more people, the more likely you're going to get to the tipping point where they decide to negotiate. So no one exactly knows where that is. And, it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks. But on average, when people engage in mass participation and civil disobedience on this sort of model, and it's been happening in the global south, just about every year for the last century, regimes are brought down. It's usually between 1 and 2 weeks. So that's in the ballpark of what we're aiming at. What people should understand is there's, with everything in society, there's no guarantees. It's not like do this and you get that. You're talking about probabilities, and obviously the issue is to maximise the probabilities of success relative to other methodologies. So it's not like there's a sort of golden bullet out there, which that doesn't exist, right? So what we're looking at is basically mass participation, civil disobedience, or conventional campaigning. Well, we know what conventional campaigning does. Carbon emissions have gone up by 60% over the last 30 years of conventional campaigning. I mean, all those people are great people and they've done really hard work, but just because you're a nice person and you work hard doesn't mean you're effective, right? Whether you're effective depends upon empirical analysis of what works and what doesn't work. And civil disobedience works. It's not guaranteed, but it's a lot better. So if people don't like what I'm saying, then obviously the reply is, what's your plan,
So come October 2019, what can Amsterdammers expect from the local Extinction Rebellion in this city? What should we do to prepare?
Well, obviously, what they need to expect is what's going to happen if we don't protest, right? We need to keep that in mind, because obviously, the implication of that question is everything's going to be fine, and then Extinction Rebellion is going to come along and cause a disturbance, and the implication is that's bad. But the fact of the matter is, if Extinction Rebellion doesn't cause a disturbance, and if there's not mass participation in civil disobedience, the disruption is going to be off the scale if governments don't act. So you need to sort of frame the situation in that sort of way. It's like disruption today or death tomorrow, right? Those are the options we've got. We haven't got a third option called business as usual, right? That's mathematically and scientifically impossible, So in that context, I don't know exactly what the plans are, but as you said in 2 or 3 questions ago, there's basically a list of things that you need to do to be effective on balance, and that's go to the capital city or the big city, and you sit down in the roads day after day, and people are arrested in large numbers or not until the government agrees to start taking emergency action. And through that process, might not succeed, of course, on the first throw of the dice, but what that does, it starts a national conversation and people start thinking about their responsibilities to their children, which is fundamentally what this is all about, right? It's not about blocking roads in Amsterdam, it's about what's going to happen to our kids and, what it means to be a citizen in a democratic state. Your responsibility, is to rebel against that state if that state is engaged in a genocidal project. And that's what we're facing today. The situation with this is the positivity comes through accepting the negativity, not by resisting it. If you're still in this mindset that you can be happy by ignoring all these facts, then you're going to start getting really miserable because you're basically living a lie. You're pretending something doesn't exist. And we all know from our personal lives that if you're resisting a reality, in your personal life, something's not going well, then that's no solution, right? The solution is to accept reality and then confront it and make it, the best you can. And a lot of the people that came to the rebellion in April came out of it and they said to me, this was the best 2 weeks of my life. And the reason for that is because people are acting on their beliefs. And they're standing up and making a stand, and that's what life's about, right? Doing what you believe in.
For more information on the Extinction Rebellion movement in the Netherlands, in Dutch and in English, see extinctionrebellion.nl.
Podcast Amsterdam.